Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com, debatephysics.com video presentation. Yeah, it's not very well presented, but what the hell. Technically correct. Anyway, comments. So there's a whole long comment thread here, still arguing Huygens, Leibniz, and Newton. Now, we know what happened in the 1700s. So, Newton died like 1727, something like that. So, no, after Newton was dead, they had a whole big fight, okay, about vis viva, the living force, and it was a thing. It actually happened for like 100 years. This was a debatable point about what is actually energy in the universe. And so I would argue that, the simple tug of war things kind of close any possibility of an argument. Just tie a string between things and you can see what equals what. The lever, for example, the balance, just overtly tells you what equals what as weight and pressure, and that's all there really is. So it should have been a moot point, but instead they did fight about it, and they did argue, I would just say, rather poorly. And there was a showcase experiment. There's experiments that are optically interesting in the sense that, oh yeah, they make you think it's true, but I can do the same thing, right? So you roll two things, one thing twice the velocity. It just happens that it will roll 4 times as far. But it's only rolling 4 times as far because it's not being slowed down as much. There's less friction when it's going fast. So it's not losing energy as quickly as the thing going slowly is. Per inch, it's losing less energy because it's placing less force on the ground. It's making less contact. Therefore, it's moving the ground less. But it's visually interesting. But I can make the same counter argument and visually interesting, and I could just show somebody sliding across thin ice and just say, there you go. They didn't fall through. So it was really highlighted by this denting clay. That is, not penetrating clay, but just denting its surface with round objects. And the simple analogy to that would be pointing an arrow versus not pointing an arrow. And I think smart people know that whether you point the arrow or not doesn't change how much impact energy the thing has. It's just a way of cheating, so to speak, in giving an advantage to one thing in terms of how it applies the energy. It applies it more efficiently for penetration. It doesn't mean it has more energy. So anyway, so that's the historical. Okay, so the truth is that this was first Huygens' idea that somehow there's this vis visa, and then it was Leibniz who picked it up and called it vis visa, okay, and made a big stink about it as being some kind of real thing. So nobody else really jumped on the Huygens bandwagon. Even though Huygens was quite well respected and all that, it just doesn't seem like anybody noticed that he had this statement in his physics. Frankly, I can't find any controversy when Huygens said it. The controversy only starts when Leibniz says it. And Leibniz published it a year before Newton published this gigantic, this huge definition, just accurate description of the function of gravity, which sort of just blew everybody else out of the water in terms of credibility. It just gave Newton this gigantic amount of credibility. And he also had this whole explanation for light and all these other phenomena. So gigantic improvement in terms of people's understanding. And so it was, and the idea is that his laws are pretty simple in the sense that the equal and opposite one, and, describing a circumstance like a cannon firing, and that half the energy, goes one way and half the energy goes the other way. So certainly for explosions, you don't have much choice. it seems to be a rather consistent rule anyway. And, and it's not conducive to any understanding that somehow there's an mv squared, that somehow one object has actually more energy than the other one. Like the bullet has 1,000 times more energy than the recoiling gun. They certainly didn't say anything like that or believe anything like that. So there's nothing written about that being true or believed or being their interpretation of the third law. So the fact is, there wouldn't have been a controversy in the 1700s if there wasn't something called the Newtonian, and the Newtonians didn't believe in mv squared. And if they did, like Voltaire and different people, then there wouldn't have been a controversy. So to say that Newton believed in mv squared is kind of silly in the context where the people who were at least of the same generation as Newton certainly didn't have that interpretation that Newton was a Leibnizian or a Huygenite. Okay. So, but he just want to keep arguing it. So, we'll play along. The rule of collisions of hard bodies by Huygens were for any masses. Obviously, sometimes he talked about equal masses, sometimes unequal masses. Well, clearly it makes a difference. But when it came to the conservation of mv squared, he didn't mention equal or unequal masses. Well, the fact that he didn't mention it doesn't mean much, does it? It's still an unexplicit statement about exactly where he says this applies and where it doesn't apply. He said it was always conserved. It was a general rule. Well, again, then it's completely defeated, okay, by Newton's rules, subsequent rules. Another rule from Huygens. The quantity of motion of two bodies can be increased or decreased by their impact. So, you can interpret, obviously, that sentence a lot of different ways. Like, obviously, there's going to be a change. But there will always remain the same quantity, okay, towards the same side by subtracting the contrary quantity of motion. Well, obviously, it won't be the same quantity in the same side. So it's silly to say 100 goes in and 50 comes back and say that's the same energy. So you can't even interpret that. That's clearly not talking about the classic example of the pendulum, okay, with the one mass and the three mass. And the simple argument that their physics claims that when the one mass comes in with 100 momentum, it'll give the three mass 150 in the same direction. So clearly in that impact, there's not the same energy going both ways. So that doesn't even make any sense. That's the conservation of momentum. So it doesn't conserve momentum. Okay, and that's exactly what Newton said. So it's not exactly what Newton said. So you're just, again, it is sort of word salad. All of these people kind of wrote word salad. And it's really disappointing, but they don't itemize their experimental results. So they don't go through each experiment and show us the details of each experiment and what they observed. And that's disappointing. Huygens and Newton corrected Descartes' conservation of the absolute quantity of motion where you don't consider the direction. So there's no evidence that Newton was fixing Descartes on any other subject than gravity. So you can say that, but I haven't seen that quote. Just accept it. You are all anti-Newtonian. So again, there wouldn't be a Deschartres. She wouldn't be famous. She wouldn't even be a footnote if it wasn't for the vis visa controversy and her explicit definition of the controversy being between Leibnizian and Newtonian physics. There wouldn't even be a concept of Leibnizian physics if Newton believed it. I mean, quite frankly, why would anybody call themselves a Leibnizian if Newton believed it? There'd be no reason to. All right. So it's just bullshit to say that there's no controversy and that there wasn't a controversy and there doesn't need to be a controversy because, frankly, you've chosen the wrong side. You've chosen the side that has no evidence on its side. All right, so this Flute Willie guy says, first person, science feels absolute because it aligns with subjective experience. So whatever, that's garbage. Third person, science is a collective effort to measure reality based on evidence. Well, this is the whole thing that's under dispute, right? Obviously, collecting evidence is necessary to any kind of deduction. So, yes, if you don't collect evidence, you might as well not be a detective. You might as well not be saying you're looking for something because you're obviously not looking. All right, so clearly that's the argument right there. There's plenty of evidence to collect, and they haven't collected any of it. They didn't do any of these experiments. They still, to this day, there is no documented experimental analysis of dropping 4 pounds 1 foot and 1 pound 4 feet. No experiment. All right, this definitely is utilitarian and always subject to change. So I'm just saying the subject to change is, again, just the Einstein thing. Okay, you can have a theory, and all you need is one piece of evidence that blows it out of the water, and it's blown out of the water. So all you need is one piece of decisive, credible evidence. And that's the real argument here, is you have somebody as a suspect for a crime, and then you find out, oh, he was 500 miles away at the time of the crime. It's a pretty good piece of evidence saying, okay, you're going the wrong way. You know, he could have hired it done, but I'm just saying he himself couldn't have done it. You can respect one person's perspective of science, but that's always subjective. Well, then there's no point in it, so I don't know why you would respect it. And not all at all scientific. Do science, not religion. So, yes, good point to make. If you're just going to tell me what you think the truth is, and you believe it to be, and you can't cite credible evidence, that's a real liability. And right now they're doing that, though. They're citing incredible evidence, like the Chardonnay or the Eddington experiment. Again, how many times do I have to point out? He says in his own journal, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. And the reason why he said it was because he also conceded he only got 10% of the data quality. 10%. I mean, it was a terrible experiment. The results were junk, frankly. No one would trust that now. No one would say 10% the data quality is good enough to draw a conclusion. No one would think that's true. All right, you would think this is what the dude is talking about. So whoever the dude is, I mean, fuck you, frankly. Unfortunately, he is saying his science is absolute compared to other people's saying their science is absolute. So that's just not true. I have no obligation to do anything but present a theory that fits and works. And that's what I'm doing. I'm not saying it's absolutely true. Go ahead, test it wherever you think it needs to be tested. I'm just saying from what I've observed, it passes the test. So can you show where it fails a test? That's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything more than that. And I'm just making the accusation that the conventional theory is clearly foundational lies. Lies about the credibility of shitty little rickety experiments. So, and all the ones that have some integrity, like actually crashing a car into a steel wall, those experiments show I'm correct. Okay, these people aren't doing science at all, though. Science is always 100% fallible, so that's just bullshit. What do you mean 100% fallible? What does that even mean? It's bullshit and subject to revision always. There's not going to be any revision about water being wet, or I could say electrons aren't as big as the Empire State Building. I mean, there's things you can say that are rock solid. And it's just bullshit to say that science is 100% fallible. There's some truths that are going to always be true. 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. 2-ness plus 2-ness is going to be 4-ness. That's never going to change, fucktard. Let's see. You should just like him, and he calls you a religious kook. You sound just like him, and he calls you a religious kook because of your ill-informing rhetoric. Some reason to think he is a kook. You both are anti-scientific religious kooks. So, there's no evidence in this statement. You didn't do anything to show anything one way or the other. You just did this rhetorical gibber. So, fuck that. I mean, useless shit. You didn't. You made the proposition that science is always, all conclusions are 100% fallible, which is, in my opinion absolutely ridiculous. Pigs don't fly. You know. Can you explain a bit more how my rhetoric is ill-informing? Well, when you cite your impression of Huygens' intent, okay, that's going to be a little bit challengeable. And you're citing it as an absolute fact that Newton actually did believe mv squared was a thing, when nothing he actually said, I mean, there's no evidence of that in his physics. So when he said force equals the change in your momentum over the change in your time, how do you pervert that into what you claim it to mean, which is somehow velocity is squared, because it's not apparent from the formula. Okay, or how I'm anti-science. Have I somehow implied that science should not be subject to change? No, you're dogmatically stating that we should believe stuff for which you can provide no evidence. You're saying something is true. You're not showing it to be true. You're saying a 5-mass object going 10 velocity has twice the energy of a 10-mass going 5 velocity, except you won't show me a single circumstance where it does twice the work. So show me the circumstance where it pushes something else further, that it gives it that extra energy. Show me how the one beats the other in terms of doing something in the universe. And you don't have a single shred of evidence. All right. Your rhetoric is anti-science, not your information. It's just whatever that is. So his rhetoric is a statement about what the truth is. And it's not a statement he can back up with anything but his own subjective opinion. You did this by not implying that it is subject to change. So more of this subject to change nonsense. If you have ever seen any of this guy's videos, you know what not to say. You just copy and pasted what this guy has been rejecting for years on years. So there's nothing wrong with him asserting his misinformation and his lies, because that just demonstrates what he is. I mean, obviously I made all these arguments in the video pointing out how the experimental evidence is clearly decisive in terms of momentum being the thing conserved and that kinetic energy is unfindable. I mean, if NASA would just tell the truth and say, look, we landed the lunar module by calculating the momentum of the thrust, not the kinetic energy of the thrust, then this whole conversation would be over, wouldn't it? I mean, is there any way to deny that as the truth? I mean, if you can't navigate in space with kinetic energy, then how could it actually be anything? It can't be something if it can't move an isolated object in empty space. If it can't do that, then it can't be real. All right, there is a time and place to use dishonest science communication, so whatever that ambiguous thing means. That time and place is not when you're talking to someone who is actually against the dishonest science rhetoric, even if they are hypocritical. So, but bullshit. Look, hypocrites should be squished wherever they exist. So if somebody's a hypocrite and you can prove they're a hypocrite, then you have an argument. You can't prove I'm a hypocrite, you fuck. So fuck you. All right. Let's see. How am I being anti-science or dishonest? Well, your dishonesty is implying that, Newton did believe in mv squared when, oh, come on. You really haven't got anything indicating that to be the truth. And why the fuck did everybody interpret Newton wrong then? Why didn't somebody say that in 1740? 1740, nobody was saying Newton believed in mv squared. How did they get it all wrong? How did every single one of them get that wrong? I'm sorry, but I really don't get what you are trying to say. Oh, now I get it. You are probably taking things out of context. Never mind. So, whatever that could mean. Do you think if Newton was presented with the energy formula 1/2 mv squared, he would have accepted that there can be two formulations of motion? Be honest. What do you think? So I'm just saying, if Newton had to express an opinion, you'd have to argue that, again, in the circumstance of something real, like a cannon, that Newton actually thought cannonballs had 1,000 times more energy than the recoiling cannon? Because I think Newton would have said so if he believed that were true. And if you could actually make more momentum in a direction, I mean, do you really think Newton would believe that I can hit something and I can make more momentum in a direction for free? Because Newton would just say, well, let me do that again, make even more. And let me do it again, I'll make even more. Why wouldn't he just say, keep doing that? And again, this is in the context of a lever clearly saying something exactly the opposite. I mean, levers just, they're momentum all the way. There's zero evidence of any kinetic energy anytime you use a lever. All right, there's just no hope for kinetic energy when you're using a lever. The mass and velocities of the object is clearly saying momentums equal momentums. Using dishonest religious scientific rhetoric on someone who is saying science is a religion is not a good idea. I'm just saying their whole argument is premised on those lies, so that's all they have. And so the argument should just be, can you provide a single shred of credible evidence? And that's it. Then the whole argument's over. And the fact is they have no evidence to debunk my argument using the ballistic pendulum, my argument using the lever, my argument using gears, my argument using hydraulics, my argument using the gun and the bullet, my argument using bowling balls. It doesn't matter. I win every single one of those arguments because they haven't presented a single counter, a pile of even reasoning to explain how those experiments aren't showing us exactly what the truth is, which is that there is no such thing as kinetic energy. It never does any work. All right. Yes, he uses religious scientific rhetoric. So again, liar. So if you're going to make an accusation, you ought to make it with quotes. Quote what religious scientific rhetoric I used. For his own attempts I know don't perpetuate insanity, whatever that means. Thanks. In context you are talking in, it's anti-science. If the context was with other scientists, your rhetoric would still be dishonest, but at least it would be a proper context for the dishonesty. So this is just such, oh, it's okay if you lie among each other. I mean, what is that? Why is that okay? So if all the cops talk about being corrupt, it's okay to be corrupt because they're all corrupt. Your misuse of scientific dishonesty is why your rhetoric is still anti-scientific. I just don't see any point. The argument is the Eddington experiment credible science in the context of what he actually wrote in his journal? What we know as the absolute fact. That is, that first, the experiment actually did suck, okay, in terms of the data quality. And second, we know it was very suspicious about what slides they, kept in the experiment, what slides they took out of the experiment. And the fact that none of that can be reconstructed because slides actually ended up disappearing just makes the whole thing a pile of garbage. And we really should expect that since there's 400 times better resolution from space and it only takes 5 minutes and you don't need an eclipse, that, yeah, the experiment should be done from space. Like, it should have been done. It should have been one of the first things on the list. Before you even make the space shuttle toilet, you should have done the Eddington experiment. All right. So he says, I'm so confused. I don't know what you mean by religious scientific rhetoric, lies, dogma. It's true because we say so, not because we have shown you so. And I don't know where I'm being dishonest. You're being dishonest in implying that somehow there's some evidence demonstrating kinetic energy actually survives all these tests. That it survives the tug of war, that it survives the lever, that it survives the ballistic pendulum, that it survives hydraulics, that it survives gears, it survives levers, it survives any of these things. It fails every fucking test. Every time it's tested by accident, in the Mythbuster case, it fails. Okay. He accepted that the two quantities are conserved in a last... No, I did not. That's an absolute lie. I simply stated, okay, that if you're going to lie about when it goes in, and you can lie about what comes out if they're the same mass. Because I won't be able to tell that you're lying in the same mass circumstance because the MV isn't going to change, you liar. And I said clearly, as soon as you change the mass, then I can see your lies. Okay, then your lies will become obvious. In the case of the gun and the bullet. The fact is the gun and the bullet don't have different capacities to do work. They don't have a different amount of energy. Okay. MV versus MV squared, especially in the case of uneven masses. So that's the important one, and I made that clear distinction. So he did just lie about what I said. You say he accepted both, even though one would have broken the third law. Are you sure you have disregarded this? You would have disregarded. Are you sure he would have disregarded this? So obviously I didn't disregard it. He doesn't have any, he can't quote me honestly saying, I think MV squared is ever conserved, because I don't think it ever exists. I'm just saying that well, you can lie about it really easily when the masses doesn't change. Because yeah, I can't prove your fake energy number isn't a fake number, energy number. Okay. Even with uneven masses. So he says even with uneven masses. So that never happened. So this Kicksturry guy is a lying sack of shit. Okay, and it doesn't break the third law. Why do you think it does? I mean, damn. I mean, I've made this argument so many times. I mean, he can't figure out how saying something has 2,000 joules going one way and 2 joules the other way doesn't violate the third law. Amazing. Bullshit. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I just can't get more simple. So if an explosion causes something to fire like a bullet, you would expect to get an equal reaction, in this case, the recoil of the gun. So that's simple enough stated. The third law doesn't say that the gun and the bullet must have equal kinetic energy. So again, this lie about whether there has to be an equal and opposite reaction. So somehow he's saying the reaction of 2,000 joules doesn't have to be equal to 2 joules. That somehow it can be that uneven and there's some reason to write a third law. That the third law means something, even though you can have those grotesque differentials. And that's what you think. So again, a 1 mass hits a 3 mass. The 3 mass now has more momentum than the 1 mass started with. Somehow that's going to be obedient to the third law? No chance. Okay. They have equal momentum. I'm pointing out kinetic energy breaks the third law, right? And you can't even follow along, facepalm. So yeah, that's pretty much the argument. Obviously, the kinetic energy theory says the important aspect, the energy aspect, is not equal. So why would Newton write the third law if it's not about energy? Okay, read my previous comment again. So no point in that. Now you're just being a fool. You asserted he would have accepted both formulas, that one breaks the third law, and now you're going to assume I misread something. Why would Newton agree with kinetic energy then if it wouldn't follow the third law? Well, it doesn't follow the second law either. Again, Newton's clearly stated twice the force, twice the velocity, 3 times the force, 3 times the velocity. So it's all bullshit. All right. So Newton's third law applies to force. So this is the hilarious part, right? So it applies to forces. Well, Newton said in his force definition that it's, twice the force, twice the velocity, 3 times the force, 3 times the velocity. So we have no evidence of kinetic energy in the sense that you didn't say the velocity squared. Okay, not energy. I hope that helps. Kinetic energy doesn't violate the third law. Well, of course it does, because it never states anything about Ke to begin with. That's the whole point. And it would. If Ke was real, if real energy is defined by kinetic energy, one of them has to be real and one of them has to be fake. They both can't be real. They both can't mean energy, so you're stuck. You have to pick one or the other. They both can't mean anything in the same environment. It doesn't work. You can't take anything seriously. One of them has to be real and one of them has to be garbage. One of them lands you on the moon. One of them fails to land you on the moon. You can't really argue they use both laws to land on the moon, can you? Do you really think that would work? If I combined them both, I would successfully land on the moon? No, it's just one of them. If I taint momentum even the slightest bit, with MV, just like a half of a 2, if I taint it at all, failure is inevitable. So it's either you explicitly use one or you explicitly use the other. You cannot use any bastardization of them. And you certainly, again, you can't use both. It's ridiculous because they give you overtly different answers for how long you keep the thruster on. People are just such shitheads. All right, after hearing DraftScience arguments, momentum is clearly real energy. Oh, that's good enough. I understand conventional physics steps over that. They literally have two formulations describing motion, but they can't understand how momentum isn't energy. But I can't understand how momentum isn't energy. Exactly. If it does work, it's energy. So unless you can provide evidence where momentum doesn't exist in a system, but kinetic energy does, that burden is on your physics, not DraftScience. Both have a mass and a velocity. Again, they're asserting the special, not visible result, in the sense of the squared velocity, which itself is a bizarre concept. So the very idea that somehow there's this extra energy that comes from nothing but you putting a square on the velocity, but there's no mechanical way to see it, no mechanical way to understand how it could possibly exist. And certainly from our own intuition, there's no way, I think, spinning a drill 5 times as fast is using 25 times the electricity, or that 5 times the speed can do 25 times the work, because obviously we know it can't, and it doesn't. Newton believed in many things that don't obey the third law, like temperature. So this is a waste of time. Temperature. What does temperature have to do with the third law? That is just too bizarre. Color, elevation above sea level, etc. So I don't know what any of those would have to do with the third law. So that's just bizarre. An effort to change the subject or something? I don't know what the fuck that could mean. So here's this Macintosh-ass wipe. But you can't understand how momentum isn't energy. So here's his answer to that. There are plenty of collision experiments. Okay, so we know there aren't. They're all the same, engineered by high school classes to fool kids, all right? And that's all they are. So they have carts with silly little crappy wheels, metal wheels, carts with little tiny metal wheels, all right? And the cheapest spring you could probably find. And they pay a couple $100 for this experiment because it shows what they want to show, because it has so many errors in it, so many variables that are destroying the actual experiment, when you should just do it with a Newton's cradle, which is a lot less error prone. So we know these are bullshit experiments. I've demonstrated the clay on Lewin's air carts is a glaring example. There's no way to say that fucking cart weighs twice as much as the other cart. There's no way. Okay, just adding up the pieces on the cart, it can't weigh what they claim. All right, that is to say momentum can be subtracted when one of the objects go in the opposite direction after the collision. So again, I'm just going to keep asserting that, okay, where's the credible experiment? I mean, the well-documented, well-done experiment. Where is your go-to experiment on that subject? And I'll just go to the Mythbusters, and I'll go to, what's the other one that's very clear? Well, I mean, any ballistic pendulum experiment, for example, but this going, oh yeah, and then there's the physicist Michael. He bought big, heavy things to do a heavy Newton's cradle and prove the point, and he gave up. So obviously, and he disappeared from being available on the internet. Okay, he just said, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. It's a pretty strong piece of evidence that, oh yeah, it just didn't work out their way. Energy obviously cannot be subtracted. So this is the bizarre part. All right, let's go. That is to say, momentum can... All right. There are plenty of collision experiments proving that momentum is a vector. So yeah, that's obvious. That is to say, momentum can be subtracted. Now that's the bullshit part. When one of the objects go in the opposite direction after the collision. So there's no negative momentum. There's no such thing as negative motion in the universe. There's absolutely no such thing. You cannot cancel energy ever. You can't make it disappear ever. And there's just no idea that you can have something go this way undoes something going that way. It's as idiotic as saying nuclear bombs have no energy because they have canceling energy in every direction. It, of course, is nonsense. Energy obviously cannot be subtracted. So then he says that. I don't get it. I mean, I read it twice. I gotta read it a third time. A vector, that is to say, momenta, can be subtracted. And then he's going to say it cannot be subtracted. When one of the objects go in opposite direction after the collision, energy obviously cannot... Oh, see, he's using the word energy to mean kinetic energy. Sorry. It's just hilarious. All right. So kinetic obviously cannot be subtracted. It can't be anything because it doesn't exist. All right. I mean, it's just so funny in the sense that, just the simplest experiment. You just add the 5 mass to a 5 mass going 10. You make it into a 10 mass going 5, and you lost half the kinetic energy. And he's going to make some argument about subtracting. Even without subtracting, the whole thing fails dismally. We have dozens and dozens of air track collisions. Yes, and you also have that very experiment I just described where you just add a mass to a moving mass and you lose half the kinetic energy and you have no evidence, no proof or evidence that half the energy left somewhere in heat or something else. Absolutely zero evidence. So it's just back to the ballistic pendulum where 99.94% of the kinetic energy disappears from the experiment, and they just claim, oh, it's in the magical heat. It's in the magical something or other. It's over there somewhere. No explanation. Certainly no evidence that it's somewhere. Low friction cart collisions, and we have Newton's cradle collisions with unequal masses. So we don't have that. So again, he's talking about these dirty, filthy, shit for brain garbage people doing, crappy experiments. And he's saying those are credible. So people with an agenda, all right, doing experiments with garbage, actual garbage, is the way to go. That's proving physics. So they've had 350 years to shore up this bullshit statement with an actual experiment, and the best they can do is Stephen Brozo. So in 350 years, they have to go with Brozo. All of them demonstrating that momentum is a vector. So we already know momentum is a vector, so that's not debatable, retard. Otherwise, momentum is not conserved. So again, lie that being a vector means there's negative momentum. So the fact that it's a vector is absolutely true. The fact that it has an anti-vector, an unvector, yeah, that's absolute bullshit. All the vectors mean something. They're all positive. There's no such thing as a negative vector. All right. The fact that momentum needs to be subtracted in order to be conserved. So again, just what he's saying is there is free momentum. So again, I can hit something, I can hit a small thing into a big thing, and I'm guaranteed to make more momentum. So anytime I take motion in a small thing and I convert it into a big thing, I'm guaranteed to make more energy going forward, more momentum. And we know momentum does work, so I'm just saying it's just free momentum, which is free energy. And that's all they're arguing for, is the existence of free energy. The momentum is a critical sign that momentum is not the same as energy. So it's a critical proof that their theory is a free energy theory. So again, all of this was also argued in Newton's time. Clearly, the accusation was thrown by Leibniz that momentum was a free energy theory, and clearly the other side made the argument to Leibnizians that, no, yours is the free energy experiment, your theory. So they didn't have any, there was no compatibility. None of them thought both these things were real. They all thought their thing was the real thing. All right. However, DS came up with explanations for why collisions with air tracks, low friction carts with wheels cannot work. I didn't say they can't work. I said you just have to be aware of the variables. And so the fact is, when the wheels are going twice as fast, that means the wheels will hold twice the amount of hide, twice the amount of energy. It's just a fact that the linear motion won't be the total energy of the cart, because the angular momentum of the wheels is essentially a flywheel. It's storage. It means the cart has more energy than you're detecting by measuring its velocity. Its velocity isn't a true measure of its total energy, jackass. All right, cannot work, or any collision done with springs or rubber bands cannot work. Now, so again, lying. So this is, there's no reason to lie. I merely argued that these are variables. They're real. Springs have a limitation. They collect energy very well. They don't give it all back, because the spring has got to move as fast as the object it's pushing. And when it's moving that fast, the object's going to leave while it's still moving its peak velocity. So it's going to be moving at its peak velocity when the other object disconnects from it. So the spring is stuck doing this. After the experiment, the spring obviously can't give away all of its energy. It's just a fact. So I did a whole video just on springs on the Debate Physics channel. This liar, just understand, he knows I did that video, and he's just lying. Again, I didn't say it can't work. I said these are variables you have to appreciate. All right, it says only metal on metal collisions can work. That's not what I said. I said ideally, that's an elastic collision. It's really very good. Newton's cradles work really well. They're really efficient. So let's understand there's no loss of any energy in any significant amount. The sound is a minimal loss, and you're stuck with air resistance. But the fact is the Newton's cradle will go for quite a while, demonstrating the system isn't losing 25% of the energy. All right, it says only metal to metal collisions can work like Newton's cradle. I pointed out it's frankly it's just a fact that it has less variables, less places to fuck up. However, there have been done and analyzed. No, they haven't. So these are that's another lie. However, these have been done and analyzed. No, they haven't. But they also confirm conventional science in the sense that momentum needs to be subtracted. No, they don't confirm any of it. So again, he's just arguing for clay, denting clay experiments. We're going all the way back to 1740, and let's just propagandize and deceive people with rubbish experiments. So the fact is, the only thing he said that was honest is that I've provided explanations. And the fact is they've ignored these simple arguments about the flaws in these experiments. They can't measure heights correctly, they can't measure arcs correctly, and they leave videos up that they know are flawed and misrepresent the truth, and they leave the videos up as a proof. So what kind of scientist is that? A scientist who makes a mistake, won't admit the mistake, and leaves the experiment up to deceive people. These are the people he's defending. I strongly recommend to duplicate these basic pendulum experiments and see the results for yourself. So again, we should do it. It shouldn't be clinically done. It shouldn't be done with high-speed cameras. He's not going to advocate that some Veritasium or somebody else actually look into this subject, right, and do the experiment. So no, it's not going to be professionally done or done with any kind of resources or money. He's saying, yes, videotape it on your shit camera, okay, with cardboard boxes holding things up and duct tape together. Yeah, that's the way. That's how physics should be done. Trillions of dollars spent on the silliest experiments imaginable, stupid gravitational wave nonsense, all this other nonsense, and they can't spend a few $1,000s to prove mv squared. A few $1,000s. They can't spend that much to actually have one go-to experiment. One really proving experiment. Like an experiment where nobody could argue with it. It's done so well. They don't have a single one of those experiments. And I can show you over and over every ballistic pendulum losing 99.94% of the kinetic energy. Just like DS believes all these experiments are crap. They are crap. Fact. Alright, so this guy says to him, when you're dealing with someone like draft physics, Yeah, like when I'm dealing with some guy with whatever poo icon, you can't pretend like scientific realism is real. So whatever that is, that the religious dishonesty DraftScience grew this problem from. That's the religious dishonesty. I didn't grow this problem from that. What I grew was an understanding that physics is supposed to be about physical things. And all of it seems to just be about wooey things. I mean, every single part of the universe you could look at, they have turned into wooicles and bent to nothings. And it's all a bunch of fucking goddamn Holy Ghost crap. It's Invisible Man all the way down. They don't have any real physics anymore. There are utilitarian truths, not real truths. Well, fuck that in the ass. There's only real truths, and fuck this utility shit. The French got pushed out of Egypt in the 1800s. What? This is, what, the Egypt card? He's going to throw the Egypt card? In the 1800s, that's the real truth. Oh, shit. The real truth is all the Egyptians are dead. They couldn't even, nobody was around who could even read a hieroglyphic. Constructed tools don't tell the full story. You already aware of this based on what you said. You are being dishonest if you don't directly imply that things aren't absolute. So this is silly. It is all absolute. And the fact is NASA knows the truth. If NASA would just say the truth, okay, that no, they never used any kinetic energy formula to ever navigate in space. They never calculate the kinetic energy of a thruster ever, because it's useless information. It's not going to be translated into the spacecraft, so it's useless information. It's absolutely, it's not just useless, it's always negative. There's no way to even turn it into a positive. There's no way to convert the miscalculation into a proper calculation, except to just erase the squared and recalculate. It can never help you, because you'd have to know exactly what the velocity was to undo the mess it made. All right, idiots like this come into existence because this bad scientific communication. No, it's because people are just inherently religious kooks. That's the simple conclusion. You're just missing the point. I've demonstrated that it's just religion. It's just a dogma, okay? And this is exactly like 1,000 years ago. They could have some argument about, the idea that, how come there's monkeys and how come this and how come that, and it doesn't look like a world God would, how come we have smelly anuses? I mean, you could just ask 4 million questions and say, why should I believe in some fucktard who made these fucking bodies that get cancer and die? Why should I believe in any of that horse shit? And they couldn't have that conversation because the dogmatist said you must believe. If you don't believe, we will. If we can't poison you or stab you or do something else, we'll figure out some way to make you irrelevant. We'll make you live in the mountains. Yeah. So this is just a religion, Claire. Nothing else going on here. Humans are just religious kooks by nature somehow. I never believed that was possible, that there could be such a thing as genetically religious. But it seems they do have some sort of I must believe in fable gene. Because these people are smart and they're showing zero integrity. I mean, we're not asking for much from these assholes, right? Show a little bit of fucking goddamn physical evidence. They can't show any credible evidence. And they won't concede it. They won't concede that if a guy says in his fucking journal, I wouldn't stake my life on these results, and I only got 10% of a data quality in a very precise experiment. I only got 10%. And they won't even concede, yeah, that's a garbage experiment. Let's do it over. I mean, it's so dishonest. The very fact that they haven't even tried it from space when it takes 5 fucking minutes. I mean, god damn, they're so dishonest. So there's nothing to say. They're religious fanatics jihading, and that's all they have is doing their blah 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 blah. Their little Allah love. It's just MV squared love. They don't know anything about this subject. They haven't really thought about how ridiculous it is. That doesn't make any goddamn sense at all. It just poofs into existence. This magical extra energy just poofs into existence. Just so goddamn stupid. I mean, it says 9.8 meters per second per 1 second. It's in timed units. And they actually think, no, it's 9.8 meters per meter. They actually think it matters how much distance you travel, and gravity will tell you how much gravity hit you, when it's obviously already written as a time-dependent force. 2 units of force, 2 units of fucking energy. God damn it. All right. I think that's enough. That'll have to do. Fuck. I hate this planet.